questions in the end of the panel if you don't mind. And we are now ready for the second presentation, which is still staying in the domain of data. It's how real-time turnaround data improves airport and airline operations. And this will be presented by two speakers. Summer from Seattle Airport and Christian from Asaya International in Germany. Summer is an airline resource and scheduling coordinator for Seattle Tacoma International Airport, and in his role he is responsible for the implementation of the airport's surface area management system. This includes ensuring the system is fully deployed for stakeholders, creating a common operating picture for the airport, which facilitates airport collaborative decision making. As a Seattle native, Samir obtained his Bachelor of Science in Aviation Management from Central Washington University. He has had various roles at this airport within landside operations and aviation maintenance before joining his current role. Christian has spent his entire career in the aviation industry, working over 8 years at Amsterdam Airport Schiphol in different functions, including airport development, capacity management, and operations management. For the last 3 years at Schiphol, Christian was head of innovation for the Schiphol Group. During this time, he met Swiss startup company Asaya. Discussion about the partnership between the airport and Asaya evolved into a partnership between Asaya and Christian personally. At the end of 2018, Christian joined Asaya to become Chief Customer Officer. We'll give a warm welcome to both speakers and look forward to the presentation.
Hello everybody. So as the moderator, thank you, introduced us. My name is Sam Turkey. I work at Seattle Tacoma International Airport for the Port of Seattle. And Hugh already went over my credentials, so we'll go over to the next slide here.
Yes, so I'm Chris. I'm properly introduced. So thanks for joining us in the early morning session today on the last day. Let's call it the graveyard shift, I guess. But we're excited, we're happy you're here to share some of the experiences of what we've both been working on for the last year or so. But before we dive into what we're actually doing and all the benefits that we've seen in that year, Simon, maybe you can start sharing with the audience of how you guys actually got into this.
Yeah, absolutely. So really the Port's interest with real-time turnaround data actually goes back to really the beginning of the Port of Seattle itself, in Seattle Tacoma International Airport. So quickly we'll go over the brief history of the airport. We started commercial service actually back in 1946, with the airport physically built in 1944, just a simple airfield. From there, our terminal facility was actually dedicated in 1949. So that first photo at the top left is actually 48, when the terminal was first being built and almost being dedicated. So we're about to celebrate our 78th anniversary for the port itself. Rolling through the timeline quickly, we have the 1980s on the bottom left photo here, and that really just shows quite an expansion with the airport to highlight with that and keep up with the demand. So an increased parking garage, as well as the inclusion of our A, B, C, and E gates. And then again, fast forwarding to the 2010s, you'll see a large expansion to the parking garage itself, with the inclusion now of the north and south satellite concourses. So all that to say that from 1949 to present day, we've actually had roughly been on the same piece of property the entire time, throughout the entire timeline of demand that we've experienced. The only expansion to that is our third runway, built back in 2008. And so to do that, we've spent 10 years of just filling in dirt on airport property to create a new runway out of nowhere. So that within itself actually just made us an extremely constrained footprint. So I'm going to say it once, say it again probably, there's no more room to properly expand in Seattle Tacoma International Airports. As I mentioned, that third runway to the left here, runway 34 left, went ahead and created a large embankment to the west side of the property, and it's very close to a surrounding community of ours. From the north, east, and south, we are physically flanked by surrounding highways, as well as commercial properties that doesn't allow further expansion, so it does that resort to us having to actually build up rather than out. So our future projects in Seattle will focus without obstructing fay lines building up rather out into the active taxiway. Even though we're on a constrained footprint, doesn't mean we're not a busy airport. This graph here illustrates the gate utilization factors for the year of 2018. So we're top of that list with around 50 million passengers for the 2018 fiscal year and 66 gates at the time. We were actually able to put nearly 755,000 passengers per gate. So again, top of the list for these are airports in the United States. So that gate utilization factor is actually 35% more than the busiest airport in the nation at the time, which was Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International, who had actually doubled our annual gate activity. So you'll see that number 4 on the list there, around 107.4 million passengers, 192 gates. They were putting around close to 560,000 passengers per year. Again, we did 755,000. So tight space, a lot of people, just pushing those through. Now, again, to illustrate how busy we were, this chart here illustrates our growth in the last 11 years. And you'll notice really a huge spike in growth between the years of 2015 and 2016. We go from 46.3 million right up to 51.5 million. And that's thanks in part to some local companies that we've had putting in their headquarters. So small businesses you probably never heard of. I'll read off the list of the top 5 employers. Boeing, Amazon, Starbucks, Costco, Microsoft, T-Mobile, all headquartered in Washington State in the Seattle region, having employees flock over to these new campuses. Again, you probably never heard of these companies, are very small. So our ultimate peak was actually back in 2018 and 2019. We had hit nearly 52 million passengers for both of those years. So again, for the last 7 years, this chart really illustrates how we've had to be efficient and how we've actually operated within our limited footprint. So that raises the question, how do we continue to allow airlines to actually equitably grow their activity in Seattle with the finite number of resources that we have? So again, during our peak, we hit 52 million, and we did that with 3 runways, and now 89 gates, and the same 22 million square feet of concrete we had back in 1949. So we need to still ensure we're accommodating for our current capital programs, but also dealing with the expansive capital programs, as we at Seattle have roughly now 29 airlines, serving 91 domestic destinations and 28 international cities. And so prior to the use of turnaround data in our surface area management system, this is kind of what it looked like during our summers. Almost a parking lot for the amount of activity happening in the region. And that is really when we then realized the need to leverage technology to make sure we're measuring our airport activity. And then from there, at that point, generating our reports that best tell the airport's constraint points, right? So using those constraint points to then identify and go ahead and tell us the areas of opportunity for improvement to not only increase our flow, but also to go ahead and reduce our delays. So this is what happens when the airlines and the airport both do not have a form of real-time operational visibility. People don't know where they're going. Air traffic control and our ramp tower can both get confused in forms of communication. And the airports and airlines are kind of lost in the abyss of aircraft that we have. It's almost an airship at that point. So that's when we really met Christian and his team. And maybe you can, Christian, kind of go over what you do and how you help us.
Yeah. So, hearing from Sam sort of about the problems, the next section I want to talk about is indeed how do we address those problems, because obviously building is not an option here. So, with the side, what we're doing is basically we sell software. We're a Swiss-based software company, and at the heart of the software that we sell is computer vision and artificial intelligence. And what we do is we use typically existing cameras, and our software analyzes those video streams coming from those cameras in order to create events and timestamps for those events. So for example, first of all, when an aircraft pulls into a gate, we'll detect that the aircraft is there. But then all the activities that start around the aircraft, like the bridge being connected, the ground power being connected, the fueler being on stand, the fueler being connected, and all the other things is basically automatically detected by the system in real time. I think it's good for a moment to realize that, especially in Seattle, not a single additional camera was placed for the first phase of the project. So the system is currently live at almost 100 gates with 2 or 3 cameras per gate, and those were all existing cameras. So it's a great way for airports to actually leverage existing infrastructure and get more out of their existing So the next thing is, of course, if we know all those things happening in turnarounds, what can we do with those data with those events? Obviously, you can analyze it after the fact, but also you can use it in real time to basically intervene if something isn't happening on time, to minimize on-time performance effects, right? So if a fueler is late, directly act rather than wait until it starts to cause a delay. And shorter turn times, more stable turn times, less delays, all feeds back into gate capacity, right? Because in the end of the day, you want to get the maximum number of turns per gate. So that's, talking about it, and that's good and fine, but I think it's better to show. Unfortunately, we were not able to do a live demonstration on the screen here. So we got a video recording for you coming up that I will provide a voiceover for. If you want to see a live demonstration of the system that's live in Seattle, please come to our booth in Zone 3 and we can accommodate that. But here you go. So what you'll see on the screen here is the interface. And at the top of the screen, you can see some basic flight information. That is actually information that we're receiving from the port in order to make all users aware of which flight am I actually looking at. That's the flight information right there. Then in the top right corner of the screen, you will actually see the video streams that the system is using and analyzing in order to create all that turnaround data. So we're just expanding the video stream here to give you a better idea of what kind of views does our system use. And here's a gate where we have two views, one focusing mostly on the starboard side, and then there's another camera view that focuses mainly on the port side of the view, which is coming up in a second. Again, cameras, this was actually recorded at night times. As you can see, there's plenty of lighting from the floodlights, the surface lighting requirements. There's actually enough for our system to operate reliably and accurately. So then below here comes the interesting part, and here you can see in a Gantt chart overview all the different events that the system has actually detected from that video. So we can see, for start and end times for some events, and some of the events are still ongoing. And this sort of gives you this basic overview of where am I in the turn and what's going on. Now, if you want more information about any specific event, that information is obviously there, and not just the timestamps, right? So you can see here when did something start and when did something end, but we also show for those timestamps the exact video frame in which it was detected. So if there's any dispute or anyone questioning the timestamp that we created, you can always go back to the video, and here you can see that this is for catering connect or disconnect, I believe. This is 1 second steps back and forward. You can see this was actually 2 seconds correctly detected. This is the disconnect that we see here right now, shown in the red box. And again, we can see if we go slightly backwards and forward in time, that this was the moment that the truck, in fact, didn't disconnect. So I already mentioned, how do we use that data? I think the first thing that's interesting that we also allow users to do is basically set up alerts for specific situations, right? Because if things are happening, we also know when things are not happening. So here you can see the alert panel, and for each user group, so for each airlines, alerts are configured. So for example, when the catering trip doesn't show up, users are directly alerted and they can directly act upon that deviation, call their catering dispatcher, their catering supplier, in order to make sure they get there as quickly as possible. Another thing that we're doing, which is here highlighted as called predicted off-clock time, is actually we use the data that we generate and we combine that with other things like traffic data, weather data, in order to predict when an aircraft is going to go off-block. And again, especially for airports, it's of course highly relevant because they're planning and using gates all over the day. It's important to know when our flight's actually coming and going. Last thing we want to show here is that you can also go back to past turnarounds. So this is more for forensic reasons, for delay code clearing, or even for SLA management. You can always go back to past turnarounds and all the similar features are there. So you can see all the data, and on top of that you can actually replay past turnarounds if there's any event of interest that you want to investigate or see why a delay was caused. And the last step we want to do here is show, because we looked at a single gate until now, and this is actually the airport overview, where you will see the alerts. On the left-hand side, you will see gate occupation, and also based on that predicted off-clock time, you will see how much % is a flight actually complete, and how much time until the gate becomes available again. And I think especially the last part, the gate availability and the predicted off-book times, so I think something that you want to share some more about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So really, the start of the benefits started flowing in once we used our real-time turnaround data and implemented it with our service area management system. So the start of the benefits really honed in on a source of a common operating picture. Right out the gate, we instantly saw multiple stakeholders within the airport instantly on the same page at the same time, and more importantly, in real time. So the top photos here on the top of this quad image are our airline stakeholders and their operations offices on site at the airport. Both our major airlines utilizing the real-time turnaround data with the service area management system to identify certain aspects of the turn, as Chris had mentioned earlier, that need more focus on, or need more attention to, or really proactively identifying certain points within the day that inhibits other aircraft from properly coming in. On the bottom here are our two airport stakeholders, our two airport staffs. So bottom left is one of our senior operations controllers down in our airport communication center, going ahead and lining up the day's gate view. And so he's using the real-time turnaround data to understand who's up next to go ahead and leave the stand. To the right here is one of our airport duty managers, actually utilizing the same system to go back in time, as Chris had shown, identifying some certain aspects of an incident that occurred at the stand to understand the timings and see what claims were actually in the right and what claims were wrong. So another amazing benefit we saw with this system was a new understanding of 4 gate holds. Before I go into the complexity of this, I do have to say that because of our constrained footprint at SEA, we experience a lot of occurrences now where aircraft are actually forced to go ahead and hold as we have no more abilities to give them. And really the turnaround data showed us and proved to us that arriving early to Seattle does not mean you're going to be on time. And that was one very cool thing we learned from this program. So we now have data that identifies the root causes for some of these patterns that can be seen in these extremely difficult and constrained periods of time throughout the day. To highlight the two, I'm going to stand up real quick to see the numbers and explain it to you guys. I have to first shout out William Steinberg of the Port of Seattle. I promised him I would do that for making this amazing graphic, explaining a very complex scenario. But with any sort of form of gate hold, we have 2 forms of aircraft that are usually involved. We have the approaching aircraft, so the red aircraft here, Seattle 123, so we'll call it, coming in to a gate that is fully occupied by the second aircraft, Seattle 456. So in this scenario, 456 here is at gate number 1. He can be late. Prior to turnaround data, we didn't know why, but now with turnaround data, we do know why. The 2 major times we really enjoyed using now with the turnaround data and the service area management system are our overlap time. So the time it takes Seattle 123 to land, the red aircraft to land and hold in its hold state, to the time here where the blue aircraft now, Seattle 456, is physically pushed back from the stand. So that is overlap time. The second time we have is our excess hold time. It's a little small sliver within the timeline here. And that is the time it takes Seattle 456 to be pushed back from its stand, to the time Seattle 123 is cleared as a hold state from the ground control tower or the FAA tower and cleared to its gate. So again, small sliver of time, huge impact to the efficiency of the operations. I'll go ahead and explain how and why these upcoming slides. So here again is a very busy photo of our operations. It's probably annoying and confusing in a lot of colors. It's shot out on purpose to just indicate how busy we get as an airport during our peak times. This is just a normal afternoon rush during a weekend for Seattle. This map here indicates all of the arriving and departing aircraft coming in and out of the movement and non-movement area. So any aircraft with a blue data tag is a departure. Any aircraft with a red data tag or a green data tag is an arrival. And this is our service area management system in full effect here. You'll notice LTD, late tarmac delay, if anything's holding. The number next to that LTD is the amount of time in minutes it's been holding for. So you notice there's a whole bunch of departures trying to get out of Seattle, but with the amount of flow that we have in the air traffic constraints, we can only put out so many at a time. That creates kind of a queue line, almost a Congo line of aircraft that you saw in the previous photo, in the third slide. And so with all those departing aircraft trying to leave Seattle, creating that line, it stops our arriving aircraft from coming into the movement area, down to taxi into the gates. So there's certain aspects where we learned with the turnaround data that there are aircraft who are cleared to their gate, but you can't get through that line of aircraft. So Delta 1042, kind of front and center in the green, they were holding for 56 minutes. So to be able to understand that was a huge game changer for us. So I did more research in that flight. It came from Atlanta. So imagine flying 4 hours from Atlanta to Seattle and then having to hold for an hour staring at your gate. You can't get to it. It's not a fun passenger experience. This is what we started noticing in 2017, 2018, we were constrained, and into 2021 prior to our automatic workflows and our improvements that we saw. So these are the improvements we saw, right? So on the left here is a graph of our average excess hold time. Remember the small sliver of time on the timeline we saw a bit earlier on that graph? So our previous average hold time, by the time it took Seattle 456 to leave the stand and Seattle 123 to be cleared to N1, average excess hold time was 138 seconds. Once we actually introduced a workflow to our ramp control tower to say, hey, this aircraft's actually cleared, and actually on top of that, the stand is cleared to go, it reduced our average excess hold time down to 30 seconds. So again, we're talking seconds here, but these seconds add up with that many aircraft we have on the stand. So again, we reduced average excess hold time by 107 seconds per holding arrival, which is a huge feat for us. On the right are some numbers here. If we had actually incorporated that same workflow into last year's number, we would have had actually reduced gate hold duration by 677 total hours. So the impact to passenger operations and the passenger experience is quite huge with these numbers. You know, it's a 14.7% reduction in gate hold overall. And then if we did further math here, we can see that if we included fuel and crew, that's nearly a savings of $1 million for our airlines who've had to hold out, wasting fuel on the active area taxi movement area. Now, of course, this kind of transitions me into our third benefit here, which was a increased awareness for our sustainability. So obviously, just like any airport, especially for Seattle, the region that we're in, air emissions and noise reduction at the airport, and of course the 4 surrounding communities around us, is one of the greatest benefits we saw from this turnaround data, piped into the surface area management system. So in a 3-month span back in 2019, our environmental team was actually out physically observing APU exhaust plumes at the gates. And so they found that APU runtime at the stand and at the gate was a lot longer than what the airline policies had originally stated. So our airlines were originally stating in the policies, only 15 to 20 minutes of APU runtime at the stand, when in reality they were pushing around 40 minutes. So that additional excess amount of APU runtime is already an additional 30 to 40,000 metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions per year, which is a huge impact to obviously the emissions and our sustainability goals that we have at the board. Another cool thing that we saw was ramp maintenance. Within ramp maintenance itself, we were able to actually see certain gates that weren't incorporating certain functions of the stand. So a great example of that is our PC Air. Why isn't N1 using its PC Air for the last 4 runs, for the last 4 turnarounds? Instead of waiting for the airline to tell us that, hey, PC Air is broken, we can identify those patterns and actually go out and send out an ops unit to identify that and find a root cause and then put in a workflow to get it fixed, which overall increases the efficiency of our airport. That's the benefits towards the airport itself and kind of into the airlines. And Chris can speak a bit more to the further benefits we saw with our airline stakeholders here in Seattle.
Cool, that's really nice. So obviously Alaska Airlines in Seattle is their hub airport, is one of the main airlines that we're working with. And when the system was introduced, we visited all the airlines and they were sort of jumping on it because they got a major operation out of Seattle. And just before we show some of the benefits that we realized, the key use case for them was they have an ops center where they have turnaround coordinators sitting behind screens overseeing multiple turnarounds as they basically progress. And before we deployed the system, the turn for them was pretty much a black box. So they were relying on incoming radio or phone communication to get information about the progress of the turn. And just to show you how this kind of worked, if a catering truck would not show up to an aircraft, the crew would actually call into the ops center, typically being annoyed, saying, hey, catering should have been here already 10 or 15 minutes ago. Then the turnaround coordinator would call the catering dispatch in order to chase them up, ask where they are, and get them to the aircraft as quickly as possible. Now with the alerts that we saw previously, they're actually the first ones to know. And first of all, by knowing quicker, reacting quicker, they can minimize the impact on on-time performance, as we will see in a minute. But what's a really cool side effect is actually that the whole work dynamic between airline crews and these dispatchers or turnaround coordinators have changed. Because now the turnaround coordinator calls the crew and says, guys, I'm terribly sorry, catering is going to be late for your aircraft, but we've chased them up, they're going to be there in 5 minutes, so you're in good hands. So instead of this complaining from the crew towards the turnaround coordinator can now be almost like an information service provider towards the crew. So that was a really cool side benefit, I'd say. So what we did in the system, we have this feature which we call the watch list, which we actually developed specifically for Alaska Airlines because they were getting alerts for all their flights, and they said, well, I'm actually only responsible for 10 flights. So we created the watch list, which allows them to basically save the flights for which they were responsible to their watch list, and acts as a filter, so they only get alerts for those flights. Now, not all departure coordinators use the feature just yet, and so what we did is we actually compared flights which were on the watch list and therefore actively managed by the alerts versus flights which were not on the watch list. So we compared those two groups on the same time period, so controlling for weather, aircraft business levels, and those kind of things. And what we can see here is if we look at on-time performance, measured as a percentage of flights that were within 5 or 15 minutes of their scheduled time, we can see that 7 to 11 percentage points more flights were actually on time for the flights which were managed through the watch list. And again, this is just because they would know when something goes off schedule quicker and act quicker. So that was a really big benefit for us to achieve. And then also another thing we measured was ground delays. And so what we did here is we looked at delays, but we subtracted inbound delays. Right? So if you have an arrival delay of 10 minutes, that is sort of subtracted from those delays, and therefore we only look at time lost on the ground, which for us is a really powerful metric to basically measure how we're impacting ground performance. And here we can see, again, the same two groups over the same time period, that there's a statistically significant difference of almost 4 minutes for Alaska Airlines. So I think that's really great. I think we've heard some airport benefits here, and there's airline benefits here as well. And what we're going to do next is share a little bit of a few plans that we have going forward in the partnership that we have. So first of all, we already talked about the predicted off-block times, which is used by the airport in order to manage the arrival flow and make sure that planes aren't holding longer than they actually have to. We recently completed, or partially completed, a study with the research institute that works for the Federal Aviation Authority, and it also independently sort of measured and concluded that the predicted off-block time is actually more accurate than the human alternative, which is the EOBT. So I think that's really nice for us that a third party, make that sort of independent judgment. As you can see, it's more accurate not just 5 minutes before departure, but actually all the way up to 45 or even 60 minutes before departure. And that's exactly the time frame in which, if you know when an aircraft is going to leave, you still have the ability to make changes to the plan. So we're excited about that, and in the United States there's the TFDM program, which is I think more or less the US equivalent of what we have as ACDM in Europe. And we know in Europe that target off-block time, which is the fundament of ACDM, is typically also one of the things that's not highly accurate. So by making this kind of step change into the fundament of ACDM, I think we can really bring that to the next level. Another thing that we're super excited about is to further improve the impact that we make on sustainability. So actually we're currently in the process of adding microphones to the gate at the gates that we're active at Seattle in order to detect when APUs are actually turned on and turned off. Like Sam already mentioned, ideally you want the airlines to turn the APU off as soon as they pull into the gate and turn it on as shortly before departure as they can. By measuring that, we can actually impact pilots' behavior on doing so, or potentially highlight problems with ground power recognition air equipment, which leads airlines to use the APU instead. So those are two cool things, but I think there's more coming, right, Sam?
Of course, why would there be? So with that, one event I'm really excited for is the incorporation of passenger loading bridge events. So in the States we call them PLBs, to my understanding. You guys call them PBBs, so passenger boarding bridges. So with that, it really allows new lens into aircraft boarding. What we're planning and we're able to do is actually incorporate the cameras in the passenger loading bridge to go ahead and extend the special secret sauce that they have of machine learning to identify what's happening and who's boarding and deboarding the aircraft. So did the first passenger get on? Did the last passenger get off? Did the cabin crew get on? The flight crew get on? Did the pilot complete his pre-flight check by entering from the other external doorway? All the way to did cabin cleaners get in and get out after they parked their vehicle on stand? So all these new facts and figures are all really helping increase the accuracy of our predicted off-block time, which overall, again, raises the efficiency factor for the airport, which can help us reduce delays overall. And that's really the start of what we're hoping for to create and enhance a digital copy of our airport. So taking everything we have locked down on the air side and incorporating it all the way to the terminal and all the way into the land side operations of the airport, understanding that continuous flow of passenger movement through what was 3 stages at one point, what we like to now call a singular flow, and fully understand what impacts it has to our operations during our peak times. Another cool event we have combining the turnaround data with our surface area management system is what we call non-cooperative vehicle tracking. So as an American airport, we are a government entity, so jealous of you Europeans. But with that, it's quite hard to tell in Alaska or Delta, hey, we have transponders for you guys, install them on your tugs and we'll track you. Doesn't really roll off the tongue that well. And so with that, it's a lot easier to actually utilize the same airside functionalities of machine learning to go ahead and install those that data on vehicles and the vehicles surrounding the aircraft. So we're now able to identify up to 22 targets here on the right of different vehicle types and go ahead and use our security camera feed to individually identify those aircraft. So here's a stand at Charlie 10, you can see the Q400 there. And so at the front of Charlie 10 is a couple of hexagons, one indicating the pushback tug, and that pink one there indicating the belt loader. And then what's cool is that it's whatever the camera can see, and it stitches all the cameras on the apron. So since the other cameras and that camera can see stand Quebec 8, it incorporates that seamlessly into the aircraft mover map. So it's one seamless map for all stakeholders, again, no matter if it's airline, an airport, stakeholder, it doesn't matter. They can all see what's going on in real time and have a better picture for, again, that constraint footprint we see. So I'm really looking forward to seeing these new features installed in Seattle, really enhancing that digital twin. We thank you guys for your time. For being here today, you instantly receive a free airport tour anytime you're in Seattle. You have my email here, so feel free to contact me. Promo code Seattle's the best. No, so with that, again, thank you guys for your time, and go ahead and visit the real-time turnaround data booth in Zone 3 if you can.